What do you do when a joke turns into the end of your marriage? I thought I was being funny, teasing him in front of friends, trying to get a reaction. But the moment I said those words and saw his face go pale, I knew the damage was done, and silence would be his only answer. My name is Lena Ward, and I've always believed that if you can't be the prettiest woman in the room, you can at least be the funniest. I used humor like armor. It made people like me, kept things light, and helped me feel in control. Aaron used to love that about me. He'd say I could make anyone laugh, even when things were falling apart. But lately, my jokes had started landing differently. He'd smile politely, sometimes not at all, and I'd push harder, thinking if I could just get a reaction, everything would feel normal again. Aaron and I had been married for 6 years. He was calm, thoughtful, one of those men who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. I used to find his quiet strength attractive. Now it made me feel invisible. He didn't flirt, didn't argue, didn't even get jealous. I told myself it meant he didn't care. I told myself he'd stop trying. So I started trying for both of us, talking louder, joking sharper, anything to fill the silence he left behind. Mark, his best friend, was the opposite. He was easygoing, playful, the kind of man who laughed loudly and always said the wrong thing on purpose. Whenever Mark came around, I felt a spark of the energy I'd been missing. It wasn't attraction, not really. It was attention, the kind I'd forgotten how to live without. Aaron never seemed bothered by it, which only made me want to test him more. The night it happened, our house was full of people. Drinks, laughter, stories from their college days. I watched Aaron sitting quietly, smiling faintly while everyone else roared with laughter. I wanted him to look at me, to show something. Jealousy, irritation, anything. I thought teasing him would make him react. I thought it would be funny. I leaned across the table, smiling too brightly, and said the one thing that would destroy everything. Maybe I should have let Mark taste me again. He knew what he was doing. The laughter stopped instantly. Even the music seemed to fade. Aaron didn't yell, didn't ask what I meant. He just stood up, his face completely still, and walked out the door. That was the last time I heard his voice. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The night had started like any other gathering. We'd cleaned the house, set the table, and opened too many bottles of wine. Aaron's friends had come over, Mark, his best friend since college, and 2 others from work. I loved these nights, mostly because I could play the entertainer. Aaron was quiet in groups, polite to a fault. I was the opposite. I liked being the one people watched, the one who kept conversations alive. It made me feel important again. Mark had always been easy to joke with. He laughed loudly, flirted harmlessly, and never seemed to take anything too seriously. Aaron trusted him completely, maybe too much. They'd been through everything together, college, first jobs, even our wedding. I'd always liked that about their friendship, how simple it was. But somewhere along the way, I started noticing the differences between them. Mark was quick and confident. Aaron was measured and patient. I told myself I only teased Mark because Aaron didn't know how to handle teasing. It made sense in my head then. Dinner was good. Laughter, stories, inside jokes I didn't understand. Mark told one about a college party, something about a bet and a dare. Everyone laughed. Aaron just smiled faintly and took another sip of wine. I leaned back and said something about how boring he'd become since we got married. People chuckled awkwardly. Aaron glanced at me, that calm, unreadable look he always had. It made me want to shake him. I wanted him to defend himself, to say something, anything, that would make him seem alive. So I pushed harder. Mark made a joke about how Aaron used to be the ladies' favorite. I laughed too loudly and said, well, maybe I should have let Mark taste me again. He knew what he was doing. The words fell out of my mouth before I understood them. For half a second, I thought people would laugh, but they didn't. The entire room froze. Fork stopped mid-air. Mark's face went pale, his mouth opening slightly like he couldn't believe I'd said it. Aaron didn't move. He didn't shout or slam the table. He just stared at me, eyes steady, expression blank. Then he stood up, pushed his chair in neatly, and said, in a low voice, "Excuse me." That was it. No anger. No scene. He walked out of the room, out of the house, and didn't look back. The silence afterward was unbearable. Someone tried to laugh, to lighten the mood, but it died immediately. I felt the heat rush to my face, my stomach twisting. I forced a smile, waving my hand like it was nothing. "Come on, it was a joke," I said too quickly. Mark wouldn't look at me. After a few minutes, people started leaving. Mark stayed behind to help clean up, but we barely spoke. When he finally did, his voice was quiet. "You went too far, Lena." I rolled my eyes, pretending not to care. "He'll get over it. He always does." Mark shook his head. "Not this time." When he left, I stood in the empty kitchen, staring at the half-finished plates and the wine-stained tablecloth. The house felt too big, too quiet. I told myself Aaron just needed to cool off, that he'd be back in an hour. He hated conflict. He'd come home, we'd argue, then move on. I poured myself another glass of wine and sat by the window, waiting for his headlights to pull into the driveway. Midnight passed, then 1, then 2. The glass in my hand was empty, and so was the space beside me. When I finally went to bed, I told myself he was being dramatic. That in the morning, I'd laugh about it, apologize, and everything would go back to normal. But when I woke up, his side of the bed was untouched, the pillow still smooth. The silence didn't feel temporary anymore. It felt like the beginning of something I couldn't undo. The next morning, I woke to sunlight cutting across the empty side of the bed. For a moment, I forgot what had happened. I reached out automatically, expecting warmth, but all I felt was cool fabric. Then it hit me. The dinner, the silence, the door closing behind him. My chest tightened. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. No messages. I texted once, then again. "Are you okay? Come home, please." It was a joke. The screen stayed blank. Downstairs, the house smelled like wine and shame. Glasses half full, napkins crumpled, a stain on the tablecloth from when I'd laughed too hard. I started cleaning, as if scrubbing could erase what I'd said. Mark's words from last night kept echoing. "You went too far." I tried not to think about them. I told myself Aaron just needed time, that he was being sensitive. He'd always been the quiet one, the type who retreated instead of argued. This was no different. By noon, I called Mira, my sister. She didn't even say hello, just, "I heard." I froze. Apparently one of the guests from last night had called her, worried about Aaron. "You humiliated him, Lena," she said flatly. "What were you thinking?" I said I was drunk, that it was meant to be funny. She didn't buy it. "It wasn't a joke. You wanted to hurt him and see if he'd still stay." Her voice cracked a little. "You keep doing this, pushing good people away just to see if they'll come back." I hung up on her. I didn't want to hear it. Around 4, I drove to Aaron's office. His car wasn't there. I waited in the parking lot anyway, hoping he'd appear, that he'd get in beside me and sigh like always, saying, "Let's not do this again." He didn't. After an hour, I drove to Mark's place instead. He answered the door looking exhausted. I barely said hello before asking if Aaron was there. He shook his head. "He came by early this morning," he said quietly. "He didn't yell, didn't even ask questions. He just said he needed space." I pressed him for details, but Mark avoided my eyes. "He's hurt, Lena. You didn't just embarrass him, you broke something." I crossed my arms, defensive. "It was just a stupid comment. He knows I didn't mean it." Mark's jaw tightened. "Everyone knows you didn't mean it, but he heard it, and once words like that are said, they can't be unheard." I hated how calm he sounded, how final. So what, he's just going to disappear? Mark sighed. If you really loved him, maybe you'd let him. Then he closed the door. I sat in my car for a long time after that. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. All I could think about was Aaron's face when I said those words. How blank it was, like a window closing. I'd never seen that look before. Not anger, not pain, just the absence of both. When I got home, the house felt colder than before. His jacket was gone from the hook. His toothbrush, missing. Even his watch, the one he always left on the dresser, wasn't there. But what struck me most was the small piece of paper left on the counter. His handwriting, steady, careful. You finally said what you think of me. I sank onto the floor, holding it. For the first time, I didn't know how to defend myself. The room spun around me, and still, there was no sound, just the quiet, heavy truth of what I'd done. The next few days were a blur of waiting, denial, and excuses. I kept expecting Aaron to walk through the door, exhausted but forgiving, like he always did after our arguments. That was our pattern, me pushing too far, him withdrawing until I pulled him back. Only this time, there was no pulling. His silence was bigger than anger. It filled every corner of the house until I couldn't breathe. I called him every morning and every night. The calls went straight to voicemail. I left messages that started calm and ended desperate. You're overreacting. It was just a joke. Please don't do this. We can fix it. Still nothing. His phone became a wall, not a lifeline. By the third day, I started calling Mark again. When he finally answered, his tone was careful. You need to stop calling him, he said. He doesn't want to talk. I demanded to know where Aaron was staying. With his brother, Mark said. He just wants space. I laughed bitterly. Space? He's acting like I actually did something. Mark didn't reply at first, then said quietly, You did. You made him feel like a fool in front of everyone who matters to him. His voice carried a sharpness I hadn't heard before. You think it's just about words, Lena, but you humiliated him using me. Do you even understand what that did to him or to me? That last part stunned me. To you, I snapped. It was a joke. Mark sighed heavily. Then maybe you should start realizing not everything is. And he hung up. After that, I stopped leaving the house. I couldn't face people. Word had spread fast, of course it had. Someone at the dinner had told someone else, and now even the neighbors looked at me with that mixture of pity and judgment. When I went to the grocery store, an old friend of Aaron's avoided eye contact entirely. I wanted to shout that it wasn't real, that it was just a stupid joke gone wrong. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about what was real. It was about what I'd made people believe. One night, Mira showed up uninvited. She stood in the doorway with that expression that meant she was done trying to be gentle. You've lost him, she said simply. You need to accept that. I told her she was wrong, that Aaron just needed time. She shook her head. He needed respect. You gave him ridicule. I followed her into the kitchen, defensive. You're acting like I cheated on him. She turned sharply. You might as well have, Lena. You used his best friend's name to wound him. That's not a joke. That's cruelty. Her words hit harder than I expected. For a moment, I couldn't speak. She softened slightly then. He's not coming back. You need to start living with that. And she left. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the note Aaron had left. I read it over and over. You finally said what you think of me. I'd tried to twist it into something smaller, something I could manage. Anger, misunderstanding, pride. But every time I read it, it felt truer. Maybe I hadn't meant the words, but they came from somewhere inside me, somewhere that wanted to hurt him, to prove I could still make him react. But he hadn't reacted. He'd simply left. And that, I realized, was worse than if he'd screamed. Because when someone finally stops trying to prove their love, it means they've already grieved it. A week passed before I saw him again. I'd found out from Mira that he was back in town for work, staying temporarily at his brother Tom's place. I convinced myself that if I could just talk to him face to face, I could fix everything. He'd see how sorry I was, how lost I'd been without him. I told myself love couldn't vanish overnight. It had to still be there, somewhere under the silence. I drove to his clinic late in the afternoon. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel the entire way. He was standing by the entrance talking to a coworker. He looked calm, composed, exactly like the man I used to rely on. When our eyes met, he froze for a moment but didn't look surprised. I stepped closer, forcing a smile that felt wrong. "Can we talk?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded and led me to the parking lot. His tone was polite, almost formal. "What do you want to say?" I opened my mouth, but the words tangled. I wanted to tell him everything, how it was just a thoughtless joke, how I missed him, how I couldn't sleep without knowing he was okay. Instead, I blurted, "You're taking this too far. I never meant it." He studied me quietly. "You think this is about what you meant," he said. His voice wasn't harsh, just tired. "It's about what you chose to say. You knew it would hurt, and you said it anyway." I started crying then, grabbing his hand before he could move away. "I just wanted you to react. You never get angry. You never fight back. I wanted to feel something from you." He stepped back, his face unreadable. "So you decided to humiliate me? To make me jealous of my best friend?" He took a slow breath. "You didn't want a reaction, Lena. You wanted control. And now you've got it. You control everything that's left." I tried to reach for him again, but he shook his head. "Please, stop," he said quietly. "I'm not angry anymore. That's how I know it's over." Those words hit harder than any shout could. I asked if there was someone else, desperate to keep him talking. He looked away. "No, there's just peace, and I'm not giving that up again." Then he turned and walked back toward the building, leaving me standing there with my tears and my excuses. I called after him once, but he didn't turn around. That night, I went to my mother's house. She tried to comfort me with the same tired phrases. "Men get over things. He'll come back once he cools down." I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't. Even she must have felt it, because her voice softened when she said, "You went too far this time." I stayed there for a few days, replaying our conversation over and over. Every word of his echoed in my head. You didn't want a reaction. You wanted control. It was true. I'd spent years poking at him, testing him, trying to make him feel smaller so I could feel bigger. It wasn't about humor. It was about power. On the third night, I dreamt of him standing at the dinner table again, looking at me the same way he had before walking out. Except this time, in the dream, I didn't laugh. I tried to apologize, but no sound came out. He turned and left anyway, just as he had in real life. When I woke, the house was quiet. My mother was asleep. I sat alone in the kitchen, realizing I wasn't mourning him leaving anymore. I was mourning the version of myself he'd once loved, the one who hadn't learned yet how cruel a single sentence could be. The divorce papers came on a Friday morning, delivered by courier. No warning, no message, just the thick envelope with my name on it. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, hoping it was something else, anything else. But it wasn't. His signature was there, clean and steady, like a period at the end of a long sentence. My mother tried to say it was just another step, that maybe he was scaring me straight. I knew better. Aaron didn't make gestures. When he did something, it was final. I spent the day wandering through the house, touching things that no longer felt mine. The coffee mugs he bought, the jacket he'd forgotten on the chair weeks ago. Everything in that place felt like a memory pretending to be furniture. That evening, Mira came by. She didn't look surprised to see the papers on the counter. "You need to sign them," she said softly. "Dragging it out won't make him come back." I wanted to shout that I wasn't ready, that I could still fix it if he'd just let me explain, but I didn't. I just nodded. She picked up the pen, placed it in my hand, and said, "You do realize this isn't about one joke, right? It's about years of them. After she left, I sat at the table and read the terms again and again. No anger in the words, no demands. Just separation. It was so calm, it made me sick. I signed my name and felt something inside me fold in on itself. 2 days later, a letter arrived in handwriting I recognized instantly. No envelope this time, just a single sheet, folded once. I'm not doing this to punish you. I just can't keep being the man you mock to feel alive. That was it. No goodbye, no closure. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it between the divorce pages before sealing them back in the envelope. I didn't cry. There was no point anymore. That night, I walked through each room one last time. Every step echoed. Every silence pressed harder. When I reached the front door, I whispered into the dark, "You won, Aaron." But the truth was, no one had won. I'd just lost the only person who ever stayed, until I laughed him out the door. After the papers were filed, life became very quiet. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, somewhere no one knew me. The silence there was different from the one at home. It didn't ache, it just lingered. Every morning I woke up early, sat with coffee, and listened to the hum of the refrigerator because it was the only sound that didn't remind me of him. People stopped calling after a while. Even my mother, who once said, "He'll come back," now just sent short texts. "How are you?" I never replied. There wasn't anything left to say that didn't sound like an excuse. Mira came once, stood by the door, and said, "He's moved on, Lena. You should too." I told her I was fine. It wasn't true, but it was easier than explaining that I didn't want to move on. I just wanted to understand why I'd pushed him away. One evening, I saw Aaron by accident. I was leaving a grocery store when he walked past the parking lot, laughing with someone from his clinic. He looked healthy, lighter somehow. For a second, I almost called out to him, but then I realized I had no right to interrupt whatever peace he'd built. I just stood there, watching as he disappeared into the crowd, realizing he was no longer mine to ruin. When I got home, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window, the same way I had the night he left. I replayed that dinner in my mind for the 1,000th time, the sound of laughter dying mid-sentence, the look on his face before he stood up, the moment I mistook silence for weakness. I used to think his calm made him fragile. Now I understood it was strength, the kind that didn't need to scream to be final. I whispered an apology into the empty room, even though he'd never hear it. I said it again, quieter, until the words didn't sound like mine anymore. Then I took a deep breath and turned off the lights. For the first time in months, I let the silence stay. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't punishment either. It was just the only thing left between us. His silence, my consequence. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.